Let's explore some alternative approaches to healing trauma. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cope and Chill podcast, where we discuss practical approaches to self-care and self-healing for better emotional and mental health and well-being. And I'm your host, Ron Martin. Check us out on YouTube, where we just published a couple of meditation practices over the last couple of weeks to help you cope and chill, and where we will release a new meditation every week. And you can find these only on our YouTube channel at Cope and Chill. But thanks for joining us wherever you're listening to us from. Check us out on our Facebook page, the Cope and Chill Podcast, Instagram at Cope and Chill, and our website, copeandchill.com. Please subscribe, tell a friend, leave a comment, and give us a like. It really helps the show grow and helps us get better. We really appreciate it. If you're listening today or tuning in each week, perhaps you're challenged with something emotionally. Or maybe you know and care for someone who is looking for some better ways to handle things, to heal. Whatever the case may be, if you're like me, you've tried a number of things to help you, but maybe really haven't quite found that thing or things that really makes a difference. For me, I had talked to several psychologists and therapists over the years. I'd explored CBT, cognitive-based therapy, on my own. I've tried prescription drugs during more difficult times, and several other things. But nothing really made a significant difference for me until I tried mindfulness meditation and self-compassion practices. For those who don't know, mindfulness is simply, as the father of mindfulness in the United States, Jon Kabat-Zinn, defines it, it's the paying attention on purpose without judgment. And so what that means really is that mindfulness can be practiced doing anything. You can pay attention on purpose and without judgment doing just about anything. But when you're first learning, or as it's typically practiced in meditation, you are paying attention to your breath or sensations within your body. And as it's defined, paying attention to these things without trying to make them do anything other than what they do. Just learning to be with whatever you're experiencing, pleasant or unpleasant, and letting that experience be without trying to change it. Sounds simple enough, but they don't call it practicing meditation for nothing. Anyway, there are a great many benefits to meditation besides what it's commonly used for, which is to reduce stress and to help you feel better. And as it turns out, mindfulness has evolved to be at the basis of several alternative approaches to healing. Today, with my guest, embodiment coach and hypnotherapist, Stacia Aashna, we will discuss three such approaches, two of which rely on the use of mindfulness to a degree. The three approaches are internal family systems, or IFS, hypnotherapy, and somatic experiencing. For both IFS and somatic experiencing, it's helpful if you've had some prior experience with mindfulness, but it's not required. I want to let you know that this is a two-part interview. We will cover internal family systems and hypnotherapy in this week's episode, and somatic experiencing in next week's episode. Anyway, as an embodiment coach and hypnotherapist, Stacia's goal is to help her clients heal their relationships with themselves so they can bloom into the person they were truly meant to be and live the lives they want. While she has studied traditional psychology, she has found her niche in non-traditional healing modalities, including IFS, hypnosis, somatic experiencing, breath work, and others. I really enjoyed this conversation because it was truly an educational one for me, and we covered a lot. I learned a lot, and I hope you feel the same. But I want to make something clear. I mentioned this before, but we covered so much that I had to break the interview into two parts. So today is part one of the interview where we talk about IFS and hypnotherapy. And next week, we will talk about somatic experiencing. So I hope you'll continue to listen today and join us again next week. I truly appreciate you being here. Thank you. And now, here's Stacia Aashna. Hey everyone, welcome to the Cope and Chill podcast. I'm here with Stacia Aashna, who is a coach and clinical hypnotherapist. She specializes in working with people who are, at least today's topic will be around trauma. And there are three approaches that we'll be talking about today. The first is something called internal family systems. We'll get into what that means and how it works, so you can see how it might apply to your life. We'll talk about, of course, hypnosis, and then we'll get into something called somatic experiencing. And we'll talk about what that means and how it works as well. So with that, welcome, Stacia.
Thank you for having me, Ronald.
Yeah. And let's begin by talking about internal family systems. What exactly is that, and how does it help people who are struggling with trauma?
Absolutely. So internal family systems, many people, if they have heard of it, they might know it as IFS because it is abbreviated to IFS, and that's usually how people share it. And internal family systems is a therapeutic model for helping people to really understand themselves. It was created by a psychologist named Dr. Richard Schwartz, who's actually, he's from the Chicago area, which is cool. So there's a great IFS community in this area. And he was working as a family therapist, and he was noticing how people have this way of relating to their family, and they describe, their relationships with their different family members. But when he would work one-on-one with individuals, he was noticing that they had a very similar way of speaking about themselves. So they would describe different aspects of themselves almost as if they had their own personalities. Like they would describe, I have this part of me that just wants to sabotage all the things that I do. Or and
I'm laughing because I think I know that part of me. Yeah, very well.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So many inner saboteurs we have, right? And then we might have a part of us that really believes in our abilities and is very confident. And then you could have an inner critic or multiple inner critics, inner children.
And I think that's the one that probably most people are familiar with, the inner critic, yes. Right? Which you tell me if I'm wrong, but it may represent that voice of maybe that parent or somebody you grew up with who was always telling you or always criticizing you, and you still hear that same recording in your head. Maybe your voice or maybe your parents' voice, I don't know, but it's still something that's sort of chiding you for behaving a certain way.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. So you're right. And some of these things, some of these parts are internalized voices from people in our families, or even, in the society or the culture we grew up in. And we internalize them. They become a part of who we are. Often we will blend with them, and they kind of take over. They take the driver's seat of our life, and they're making the decisions. And that generally doesn't lead us where we want to go, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially, this model helps us to see ourselves as multidimensional. And people are probably also already speaking in parts language. Like people will naturally say, yeah, a part of me wants to do this, but a part of me wants to do that. Mm-hmm. And I love the model for so many reasons, but one of them is a lot of people think there's something wrong with that. Like, why can't I just be consistent in my choices? Or, why is it that I have all this inner turmoil? And this model helps people to really understand, really what's going on, where all those voices originate from, whether it was influenced by your parents, as you said, or some other reason. But we also learn that all of these different aspects of our personality all these parts, they call them in IFS, are all well-intended. They're all trying to help us and to support us. It's just that a lot of those strategies are outdated. They're things that we learned in childhood, maybe in a traumatic household where we didn't get the right guidance. And it makes sense, but we need to kind of update and figure out new strategies, right?
Yeah. So as you talk about that, what comes to mind for me in my own personal experience is I'm probably more so when I was younger, maybe than I am now, but I think I still have quite a bit of it, is the perfectionism, right?
Oh,
And my
yeah.
father was a perfectionist, right? And the ducks had to be in a row, everything's had to be perfect and done correctly, even down to like how you stack the dishwasher, right? I mean, it had to be done in a way that made sense to him, or it wasn't done right, right?
Mm.
And so even to this day, there's some particular things I have in the way that I stack the dishwasher, right? It has to be
Yeah.
stacked that way. And so the what I've learned about myself in that experience and perfectionism in and of itself is that perfectionism, for me at least, represented a way of avoiding external criticism, right? If I did things right, then I wouldn't get criticized or judged. And
Right.
so what we do is, and then, that sort of extended to my career as a consultant earlier in life. And the idea that as a consultant, you can't be wrong because it damages your credibility, your reputation, all that kind of stuff. So at least you can't be inaccurate. I'll say it that way. So you've got to make sure all your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed. So it becomes a defense mechanism, becomes a
Yes.
form of protection.
Yes.
But to your point is, as we grow older and we develop other skills and other ways of seeing the world, perhaps there may be better coping skills, better techniques that we can apply. Is that fair?
Yes, exactly. And that's a really great example of a part, and that this part of you had a strategy that you learned from your father. And I bet it worked in many ways, right?
And
And
it
we
worked
can
for him
appreciate,
too. Yeah.
right.
He was an
That's
excellent
wonderful.
engineer. Yeah. Yeah.
There you go,
Yeah.
right? So it's not, again, it's the key is not to criticize the parts, or like, for example, Richard Schwartz actually wrote a book called No Bad Parts. These parts are trying to help. That part of you is like,
Mhm.
it wants to help you to be successful, to to protect you, to feel safe. And that is really great. And I'm glad that you had that aspect of your personality to help you. But I bet there's also aspects of that don't really work, right?
It can run
Perfection is,
amok. Yeah.
oh yeah, right? So that's how all those parts
Yeah.
work, right? They work to an extent, but then they also don't work. And that's where we need to kind of update. That's a term that we use in IFS, is
Mhm.
really updating and integrating into the present and finding new healthy strategies to achieve the kinds of goals that we have in our life.
So
And yep.
I was going to say, so the perfectionist in my case might turn into the saboteur, because it's oh, no, you can't
Yes.
move forward because it's got to be perfect, even though in this instance it may not be any such thing as perfection, right? I mean, it's like, but you've convinced yourself that you've got to have everything right before and you can't move forward until you've done that, and because you haven't done that, you will not move forward, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I totally get that. And I think that's probably how everybody experiences perfectionism, right? It, there is no such thing as a perfect person, right? There's like, it's like being on this hamster wheel constantly trying to achieve perfection, and it's impossible.
Yeah.
So
And
I always
exhausting.
say that's, yeah, right. And so what I've also discovered is that when we go inside and we really sit with perfection, with a part that is a perfectionist, is that part is exhausted and it's tired of doing this. It's, and that's where we can go in with the help of a practitioner like myself, and we can unburden the part by sitting with it, sitting with that part. And when I say that, I mean really like pausing almost in a meditative state and being with that part of you and giving it compassion,
Yeah.
giving it understanding.
Yeah.
And eventually it starts to loosen its grip It
Mm.
starts to transform. It reveals that it really doesn't want to do this anymore. We can then do what is called unburdening, where we can say, okay, is there something that this part is carrying? Is there a burden there that wants to be released so that this part can transform and take on a new role? Maybe
Mm.
it doesn't want to be tied to this, like this endless, always trying to achieve perfectionism and never really getting there. Maybe it wants to instead be sort of a consultant in your system that helps you achieve your personal best, which is very different, right? Because we're not trying to make the perfectionist part go away. We just want it to transform and become more sort of balanced, right? Just
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, is, so again, in my instance, it's like if the perfectionism was a form of protection, especially when I was younger,
Mhm.
what we're saying is that maybe it's not so powerful or overpowering,
Yeah.
and that now it can be more, as you say, a consultant to say, okay, let's check this box and see if it's good enough. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Right.
Yes.
And use it more as a sort of a checklist, say, okay, but recognizing that you still have control and saying that, okay, it is not perfect and I'm still
Right.
going to move forward with it anyway. You
Right.
don't get that
Yeah.
decision-making role anymore.
Right. So it's not debilitating, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want perfectionism in the driver's seat, right? We want, so in IFS, there's a few other terms that we use, one of which is called self, and that is self energy. And that the whole goal of the therapy is that self is leading, and self represents the conscious core of a person. It is
Mm.
that part that is compassionate, that is courageous, um, that is curious, right? It's not this, it's not things like being, it's not critical, it's all accepting, it's loving. And through that, through embodying self, that's when we can make decisions from a more clear and conscious place.
Okay.
And yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I had something that I wanted to pick up on. Did you want
Go
to
for
finish your
it.
thought there?
No, go for
Okay. So
it.
when you talk about your conscious core, and I
Mhm,
think when we talked about this last time,
mhm,
the way I understood this is, so I'm an avid meditator,
mhm.
and I had read this book. Oh gosh, I'm now forgetting the name of the book. But it was very helpful. I'll put it in the show notes when I remember the name. About when I meditate, especially as a mindfulness
Yeah.
practitioner, that we are observing, we're feeling, we're observing.
Mhm.
But the book does a great job of really diving into, well, who exactly is observing? Who exactly
Yes.
is feeling? And the key thing for me, the key takeaway was, essentially, it was saying we are not our feelings, which was a tremendous transformation for me, because
Mhm.
I so closely identify with my feelings. I felt if I was feeling something, it's like that represented me. And the, not to simplify things too much, but the book actually helped me understand that a feeling is the same kind of an object as a chair is. It's just something that's there, but you're experiencing the chair just as you are that feeling. It's but who's experiencing that? That's our conscious core, right? We take it all in,
Mhm. Mhm.
and we
Mhm.
have the ability to separate from all of these things, and
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
really sort of integrate, or not
Mhm.
really call them ourselves. Is that fair? I
Right.
mean, you tell me, but that's what I took
Yeah.
away from it. Yeah.
So I also practice mindfulness, and I think that mindfulness and IFS really work well
Both
together
together. Yeah.
because it is about embodying that observer self, right? That can be objective. And when we step back into that place and we're not overly identified with these different aspects of ourselves, then what are we? Then we can much we can we're much more available to take care of our feelings, because I think all of the feelings are valid, they're really important, and they need loving care. But when we're identified with them, it's very
Yeah.
hard to take care of our feelings.
Yeah.
But if we can step back, it's sort of like, if anyone does any sort of reparenting work, it's almost like also
Mm.
stepping back into this sort of conscious parental role with yourself, where you can now see your feelings and all these different aspects of you as almost like your child parts. And a
Yeah.
lot of them do, or originate in childhood,
Yeah.
and then you can be with them in a way that is compassionate and kind and take care of them, but you also don't have you don't necessarily have an agenda for them. It's really just about bringing them into a space of awareness and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the key. That's what transforms them.
Mm-hmm.
It is, again, it's not about like forcing anything to happen. It's really just like in a mindfulness practice, just being in a place of awareness, things transform. And anybody who is an avid meditator has experienced that.
So for instance, so being aware that I have this part of me that is a perfectionist,
Mhm.
and as I'm maybe planning to do something, right, take on a project or something, it's just recognizing that that part of me is there and is
Mhm.
hovering and waiting to interject itself into the work that I'm doing,
Yeah.
but being aware of that, right? And then therefore, because I'm aware, I can make a conscious choice about how much control I allow that part of me to have in what we're trying to do. Is that a fair way of
Right.
looking at this?
Absolutely. Seeing it through a lens of curiosity and saying, oh,
Mm.
there's my perfectionist part showing up again. And you can even ask that part of you, what is it? What is it really? Just first of all, acknowledge it. Okay, that part's showing up again. And this is very much like, again, aligned with mindfulness. Oh,
Yeah.
there's a thought, right? Like there's
Yeah.
that perfectionist part. I see you. Um, you know, is there anything that you need from me? You can actually ask parts that. And often it's just an acknowledgement. And you might even hear, when I sit with clients, we hear things like, there's parts of us that are afraid and just really are, afraid of being hurt or afraid of being rejected. And that's where we can, imagine bringing those different aspects of ourselves into our own loving embrace.
Mhm.
And through that, they transform. I'll also say, because we haven't talked about this yet, but we're talking about perfectionism, which would
Yeah.
be a protective part.
Yeah.
Underneath those protective parts are what we call exiles. And
Mm.
those are the parts of us that are wounded, the parts of us that hold
Yes.
things like fear and grief.
Yes.
And if a protective part is really got a grip on us, like if we're really controlled by perfectionism, then I would bet you that underneath that perfectionism is some deeper wound that also needs to be cared for.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Right? The cool thing about IFS is it's very empowering because people realize through this modality that you really have everything that you need inside of you to heal, no matter how much trauma you've endured. We all have self energy. We all have just what we need inside to be with all these different parts of ourselves, and to help them to transform.
Mm.
And it's really, I mean, my clients are constantly having these like just moments of just sort of delicious surprise, like just feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I could do that.
Mhm.
I can't believe I could do that with myself. And that's a wonderful thing because then people start to feel things again that they haven't felt in a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And those, because when we have to take on roles like perfectionism or being really hypercritical of ourselves, that's a lot of heaviness, right? Like that
Yes.
just is a weight on our shoulders.
Yeah.
And when we lift that off and we unburden ourselves from all of that protective, defensive energy, all of a sudden there's like all this freed up space.
Yeah.
And then we can like be really curious about, well, who am I if I'm not just controlled by perfectionism?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm 56 years old and I'm kind of going through that stage right now where I'm sort of feeling like unburdened by some things because I've been
Yeah.
working at this for a while. And that question about like who am I is
Mhm.
actually is actually a very interesting question to ask at 56 because it's like,
Mhm.
wow. It's like I feel in some ways like I'm starting over again. But that's also an
Yeah,
opportunity. But okay.
absolutely.
So just to make it clear, so when we talk about how this can help with trauma,
Mhm.
what we're saying is so we're recognizing the different parts and
Right.
that traumatized part of ourselves, is that the exiled part?
It's all part of it. So
All
the
of it.
exiles and the protective parts.
Mhm.
And and the way that we can tie this into trauma is if you have endured trauma, what happens is often it's like we leave parts of ourselves, not by choice, but it just happens as a result of the trauma. It's like we leave aspects of ourselves in the past. They're like frozen in time.
Mhm.
And often people who have trauma will feel like they're almost reliving their trauma over and over again through different situations. Or if you have PTSD or CPTSD, it might show up as a flashback, as a feeling. And that might be that this is this part of you that is still kind of like stuck there,
Mhm.
and it's not integrated in the present.
Mhm.
You know, it's very, very common that we will connect with some aspect of ourselves and realize that it literally thinks we're still 5 years old or 10 years old,
Yeah. Yeah.
and doesn't realize like, oh, life is there's these beautiful moments where when we get present with ourselves and we bring these different aspects of ourselves that are frozen in time into our present life, and we let them know, hey, life is really different. Now I have safety. Now I
Yeah.
have resources.
Yeah.
Now I'm not in that scary home.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there's like this, that's part of the unburdening. So then it's like, okay, there's a huge wave of relief often. And then it's like, okay, now I can, okay, I can relax a little bit. I don't have to be as scared because now I know that I am no longer in that traumatic
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
And that might take many, many sessions of
Yes.
just continuously updating and being with yourself. But trauma has a way of kind of keeping us trapped in the past.
Sure.
And as a trauma survivor myself,
Mhm.
I don't want to be back there. I'm
Yeah,
done. I'm like,
that's right.
I
You
want,
want to move forward. Yeah, and be
oh my
unburdened.
gosh.
Yeah.
Exactly. I want to be unburdened because that wasn't fun. And I know what it's like to stay there, to feel
Yes.
like I'm just stuck in that. And I'm sure that some of your listeners might resonate with that too. And yeah, none of us want to
I
be
can
back
I can
there.
resonate with it.
Yeah.
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 Um, all right. So that's been an awesome sort of introductory level
Mhm.
conversation about IFS, internal family systems. So I want to make sure that our audience has a chance to understand the other approaches that you utilize to help people with trauma. And so the next one I'd like to talk about is hypnotherapy. And of course, I'm sure people have their preconceptions about what hypnotherapy is, the
Mhm.
perceptions of it. And I think what we want to do is let people hear from an actual practitioner, an actual hypnotherapist, exactly what it is and what it isn't, and how it can help. So maybe we'll just start there with what it is and what it isn't, and then go from
Right.
there.
Absolutely. So, yeah, hypnosis is I think it's widely portrayed as like a stage act where you have an audience and you get them to do silly things. That's one way, or it's mind control. And in my therapeutic practice of hypnosis, that it's none of that.
Mhm.
I don't make my clients cluck like chickens, and
Yeah.
I'm definitely not controlling their minds. I like to say that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis
Mhm.
because really my clients are always in charge of their sessions. It's what it really is a very empowering tool for people to navigate their subconscious mind, which is the part of their mind that really stores all the memories of their past,
Mhm. Mhm.
those patterns and habits, all that stuff that's really kind of in the background guiding you in your life. And we really want to work with this part of the mind because that's where so much of what we're struggling with, that's where the origin is of it. So this is taking us much deeper than that conscious mind and into that deeper part of the mind. And we're navigating the subconscious in a conscious way, right?
Mhm.
So it helps us to navigate some of those past experiences through a conscious lens. And often my clients are able to really make connections much more quickly that way. Things that are, we bury a lot of stuff, and it
Yeah.
goes
Yeah.
into those deeper parts of the mind. And with hypnosis, it's a lot easier to access that, and also to create new healthy patterns and thoughts.
So if I were a patient or client of yours, or however you call
Mhm.
it, what how would it work for me to actually go through the hypnosis? So when you talk about the conscious mind versus the subconscious mind, like
Mhm.
what would I actually be doing in a session,
Right.
um, you know, on the receiving
And
end? Yeah.
it's so there's a few different steps that we go through, but it is very similar to
I was
meditation.
going to ask
But
the
we're
difference between the two. Yeah.
very, very similar. I mean, we're going into a very deep state of relaxation. We're not trying to go into a sleep state. It's sort of like that feeling right before you go to bed, and you're kind
Hmm.
of like laying there and you're really tired, and maybe you're drifting in and out. So we're going into like the brain waves are really slowing down, and that's the sign that we're kind of entering more into the subconscious part of our mind. Um, so clients will often remember parts of the session, and sometimes they won't remember any of it, but mostly they remember some parts of the session, not all of it though. But there's an induction phase, and that consists of things like therapeutic breath work, visualization, kind of going on a little bit of a visual journey.
So
Uh,
relaxing. Yeah. And those two
yeah,
things are very much like meditation. Yeah.
right. But it's a lot of that. And we're just really deeply relaxing the body
Hmm.
and the mind. And eventually there's a countdown, and that's taking you into a deeper, like the heart of the session, into a trance state where you're just very deeply relaxed.
Hmm.
And then depending on, what our goal is for that session, I will again continue to use visualization. Often I'm using a lot of sort of metaphor to help my clients to achieve the result that they're looking for from that session.
Hmm.
And sometimes there is actually a dialogue between me and the client where they will be speaking from the experience that they're having, especially if we're doing something like age regression. Say we're going back to a memory in childhood where we want to re-experience that. Maybe there was a trauma that occurred, and we want to go back and we want to heal that experience. So I might actually be in dialogue with the client when they're in that experience. I'm very, very conscious of safety and making sure that my clients feel really safe. And there's a lot of ways that I do that. After we've gone through all of this, then there's a gentle waking up, and and that is it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's really about, again, I work with hypnosis for a lot of different issues, but we're trying to create positive impressions in the mind, and we're trying to heal maybe past experiences that happen that have left a negative imprint that the client is really struggling with in their
Hmm.
life today.
Hmm. Great. That's an awesome explanation. So, and as an example, if you think you can share, when we talk about how you might use this to help with trauma that someone's
Mhm.
struggling with, would it be something like, I suppose every situation is a little different, but would it be something like where you help them go back to a childhood experience or something like that? And then do you get them to reframe how that
Yes,
experience happens in their mind?
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So we might just start with an emotion like anxiety. Say I have a client that's dealing with anxiety, and it's pretty dominant in their life today.
Yeah.
And so I will go back to very open-ended. Let's go back to a memory from childhood where you were feeling anxious, and we don't have a discussion usually beforehand of what that's going to be. It just kind of happens organically. Once I had a client who, this is actually a common scenario, which has surprised me, is a lot of clients will go back to the classroom. They'll go back to I'll say, okay, let's go back to a memory in childhood where you experienced anxiety. And then they'll tell me what they're experiencing. And they're like, I'm at my desk, and there's something that's happening there that's really activating and triggering. And maybe it's something that happened over and over again
Mhm.
throughout their time in school that really just made them feel very anxious. So we'll experience that, we'll observe it, just that observer role. And often then I will have them come back into the situation to be with that child, but as their adult self.
Mhm.
and then we can recover that child self. We can be with that child in a way that is healthy and healing, and learn more about what it's dealing with. And often I'll also bring in IFS techniques here.
I was going to say,
And
it sounds like it's related to the IFS. Yeah.
the
Hmm.
nice thing about hypnosis, I'll say, is that because we are doing so much relaxation, is it gets the mind and the system to relax so much that a lot of our protective defenses will relax. So if there are people who have very, very protective systems where it's like it takes a long time to access some of this stuff, like some of these deeper wounds,
Yeah.
hypnosis expedites that. It's
Mm.
like, and I wouldn't say that this is for everyone,
Yeah.
but I've used it with a lot of my clients, and it's really effective for them.
Yeah. And that concludes part 1 of my interview with Stacia Aashna. Please join us again next week for part 2, where we talk about somatic experiencing as a means to healing trauma. Thank you for joining us again today. I hope you were able to take some inspiration or something of value from today's show. To access all of the resources and links mentioned, please head on over to copeandchill.com or our video-based podcast on our YouTube channel at Cope and Chill, where you will find show notes for today's episode. That's Cope and Chill, copeandchill.com. And for information about upcoming episodes, please check us out on Instagram at Cope and Chill. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're joining us from YouTube, and leave us a comment wherever else you're joining us from. Please come back and join us again for next week's episode. Until then, take care of yourselves.